A new season of Formula One is less than a week away. The last 3 months have passed in the blink of an eye, and this weekend we will go racing in Bahrain. But what are we expecting after the 3 days of pre-season testing? I'm Jack Nichols, and this is the Chequered Flag Podcast. Now, before we get stuck into lap times and Andrew Benson talks about tyres, you may have read over the winter that the presenter of this podcast, Jenny Gow, suffered a severe stroke. She was hospitalised and is now on the road to recovery. I popped in to see her a few weeks ago. She was up and about and her usual jovial self, and she sent us a little message ahead of the season.
Hi gang, sorry not to be there with you for the start of the season. I'm progressing relatively well since having my stroke at the end of December. It's not quite the off-season I'd had in mind. As you can probably tell, my speech has been the thing most affected, ironically, but we're working on that. I'm really looking forward to the start of the season and hope we'll get a really good title fight this year. Lots of great racing and maybe even some surprise winners. Wishing you all the best for the season.
So, yeah, obviously we wish Jenny all the best and hope to see her again soon. For now, my guests are the former Formula One driver Jolyon Palmer, the BBC Sport chief F1 writer Andrew Benson, and F1 reporter Rosanna Tennant. What is the favourite thing you did over the last 3 months, Andrew?
It's been so miserable in England, hasn't it? It's been cold or it's been
crunched
raining.
some long-run data. Go on.
That was not the best thing I did, Jolyon, as we'll get into in a minute. But yeah, it's just been quite a quiet winter. I mean, it's been a busy winter work-wise because, as you may know, there's been a whole load of palaver over the FIA president, which has been interesting to say the least. So I would say that's been the most interesting thing I've done over the winter, professionally anyway.
Wow. Okay, professional. Yeah, I was talking more personally, but we can keep it professional. That's fine if that's how you want it to go. Rosanna, what was the highlight of your off-season?
Well, professionally, it's got to be working at BBC Radio Norfolk. That has kept me busy. Reading the news to the great and the good of the county here in East Anglia. And then personally, I'm just going to say I got engaged. So life's taking a new, exciting direction. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Palmer?
I went husky sledding in Riga. Have
Jolyon
you guys been husky sledding?
I've heard about it. Doesn't it smell?
They do a lot of weeing, but they're hydrated, which is good. So you take the rough with the smooth, and they got some power, and then it sort of slows down a little bit when you go up a hill. But
what speed do you get up to?
I wasn't tracking it, but I would say you're probably talking 20 mph on a burst.
Really?
They're pretty quick. Yeah, they're pretty quick. There was a voyage.
Did you take the reins?
I had the reins, but I confessed that the Huskies seemed to know where they were going more than me. So they went and I held onto the reins for dear life, basically. But it was a nice new experience, back behind the wheel of sorts. And then...
your professional return.
Yeah, exactly.
With a helmet and race suit on.
Oh, and 20 miles an hour, sorry. It was exhilarating. Oh, the speed. What about you, Jack?
The buzz was back, eh?
Jack's been on one long tour, haven't you, Jack?
Yeah, basically. I'm in Cape Town currently for Formula E. And before that I was in India for Formula E. Before that I was in Mexico for Formula E. So it hasn't really felt like much of an off-season. But excited for Formula One to be back. What I guess overall, Andrew, are there last year was big new rule changes, new cars, etc. Is there much difference going into this season?
Not really. I mean, if you want to get super technical early on, the floor edges have been raised to try and stop porpoising being a thing. 15 millimeters, I think, is the number. And there are new tyres, although I would imagine they're Pirellis and behave very much like any other Pirelli. Let's wait and see. But other than that, there's not been a huge amount of change in Formula One. Well, there may have been quite a significant change, actually, but we'll get onto that in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. Well. In fact, let's do that now, Andrew. Then we'll get into the testing and stuff like that. So, I mean, I presume we're talking about the FIA president here.
No, I wasn't actually. I was thinking of
Oh.
on track, but yeah. What I was really referring to was that last season started, if everyone remembers, with Ferrari and Red Bull neck and neck. Maybe Ferrari were even slightly quicker. There was a big close battle between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. It looked like it was going to be great for a while. And then it all fizzled out and Verstappen dominated. The fear after testing this year is that the first bit's going to be skipped and we're just going to go straight to the second bit, and it's going to be like that all year. But it's only testing, so, hope springs eternal. But I think everybody has a bit of a fear that this might be 2002 or 2004 all over again.
But we famously can't read anything into testing, right? But we can.
Well, Jolien, what do you think? You were there.
I want to have the eternal spring of hope, but it does look like Red Bull. So in 3 days of testing, barely anything went wrong. They had a small oil leak one day, which just derailed a few laps of running. And the car just looked so good from the get-go. And as Andrew's already said, the rule changes they're minimal for this season. So all the car concepts are basically carried over from last season. Red Bull have stuck to their guns. Ferrari have pretty much stuck to their guns. Mercedes have still fairly well stuck to their guns with some small changes. And it looks like the Red Bull way, from what we can see in testing, still looks like a decent way to be. I think the question is whether Ferrari can get close. And it's also only on one track. It's only on Bahrain, and there's street circuits to come where Ferrari were very strong last year. There's faster circuits to come where Mercedes were stronger last year. So there's me springing some eternal hope. But it does look like Red Bull, they could barely contain their smiles this week in testing. Everyone was happy. They were all very bullish about their aims, whereas the other teams were sort of like, oh, you never know. Red Bull looks strong and we'll see if we can fight them. Red Bull were like, yeah, we're strong. We're strong. So make of that what you will.
But Rosanna, Red Bull are a bullish team in general.
Literally.
They
are literally a bullish team.
They do what they say on their tin. Exactly that, Jack. No, you're right. I think Jolien said that. Weird that, isn't it? No, normally the teams play it down and they sort of say, oh no, look over there, look at what they're doing. They're going to be the ones to watch. But yeah, Red Bull definitely, as you say, they couldn't hide the confidence, their grins, and Max Verstappen just stating from the off. I mean, we wouldn't expect anything different, would we? We're here to win and win the championship.
So does this season potentially depend on Perez in terms of a fight at the front?
Well, let's hope not, because it's not going to be one if it does, is it?
I mean, he needs to up his game. He wasn't comfortable in last year's car, and given that it's just a little evolution of last year's car, they say he's more comfortable, and they're both saying the same thing about the car, both Sergio and Max. So that bodes well for the team. I don't think it necessarily bodes well for Sergio Perez.
Something that was interesting in testing was Red Bull seemed to back Perez, giving him the plum bit of running in the 3 days. So it was basically a day and a half per driver. And you want to be in the car on the last day, and particularly on the last half day, because that's when you've got the track's in the best condition, you've got all the rubber down, maximum grip. If there's been changes to the car, which there will have been, either new upgrade parts or at least honing it in a setup direction, you feel it in the best condition. And actually, Max didn't drive at all on the last day. So that looks to me like Red Bull, they're offering Perez the chance to really get acquainted with this car well. It also sort of conversely says Max is uber confident that normally if he wanted to test that last day, he would, but he was chilled out, probably having a massage, sip of some coconut water and taking it all in.
Sounds like that's what you were up to, Jolien.
It's what I learned.
You sound like you're speaking from experience.
No, I learned that he's a big coconut water fan over testing. It was one of my breakthrough learns, apparently.
Wow. See, Andrew, you could learn a lesson or two in journalism from Jolien here. You got to learn these big stories.
Undoubtedly.
I get the big scoops. I get them.
So if we're thinking that Ferrari are going to be Red Bull's closest competitors, whether they're close enough or not, we'll wait and see. Fred Vasseur, new team principal, in fact, since we last spoke to you. But are we thinking they're just going to be in a sort of league of their own a little bit, Jolien?
I hope not, obviously. I really like Fred as a Ferrari team boss. He's just a racer through and through. And so often I look at Ferrari and I just see like a political figurehead at the top of the team. Or, I mean, Mattia Binotto came from design background. And I do think with Fred, they've got just an absolute racer who has earned his way through to Formula One by managing and running one of the crack junior series teams of ever. He made it into a force in the junior series, got into Formula One as a team principal with Renault, then Alfa Romeo, and he knows his way. He knows the operational side of it, which is what I'm most excited for with Ferrari, because that's where they were struggling, and he's already made changes. The lead strategist from last year, which was a very contentious point, has been immediately benched back to working in Maranello, which is just quite a punchy start, really, from Fred, taking him out of the firing line and going for that. As far as the car goes, it's tough. It's tough to read. There's Mercedes still, which we can't discount. And can Ferrari get to Red Bull? We'll see.
It's been an interesting change of tone at Ferrari, actually, I think. Just what being involved in, a few press conferences with Fred Vasseur and the drivers and so on over the winter. Mattia Binotto, forgive me, he never actually admitted that there were any strategy problems last year. Whereas the first thing Vasseur did in his very first press conference was to say we need to make changes, and to explain that it was a bit more complicated than people think. But it was no hiding from anything. It was just like, yeah, we need to do stuff, and I think we've seen that all the way along so far. It's just a refreshing straightforwardness, just not trying to hide anything. So the signs initially are good. I mean, the drivers are talking positively about Vasseur, as you would expect them to. But why not just admit that there are problems when there are problems?
He's punchy, isn't he? That's what I quite like. I mean, he's actually got this, what I find a ridiculous jovial persona, because I don't remember him ever having it in the past. But now he's sort of found his place in Formula One, and he seems he's quite a funny guy. But he was always more of a bulldog character, I think, when he was a sort of GP2 team principal, and a man of few words at Renault as well. But yeah, don't let him kid you that he's just a happy-go-lucky team principal. He's also one of the most straight-talking people that you'll meet in the F1 paddock. And whilst Mattia Binotto had a great technical background, he was sort of liked by everyone, but in that way, he would never come out and say, this was really poor, we need to make changes, we need to work on this. And I think there'll be probably a little bit more ownership of things that go wrong this year. And I hope there is, because that seemed to it wasn't very comfortable sometimes at Ferrari last year.
Well, ultimately, that's what did for Binotto, I think, or was one of the big things that did for him. There was no indication, of an understanding that things were going wrong, certainly not publicly, although it was interesting to watch the Drive to Survive series, by the way, over the last couple of days and see him admitting to camera that they were making mistakes. Well, why didn't he tell us that over the course of last year? But also no indication that anything needed to be done about it. And I think they basically, the bosses of Ferrari, John Elkann, the chairman, and the CEO, Benedetto Vigna, basically lost confidence in his ability to make those changes, and that's why he's gone.
I'm still waiting for him to pop up somewhere, because he swore blindly to me in the Abu Dhabi paddock that he was going to be here next year. So he obviously had no idea that he was on the way out.
Should we get him in for co-coms? Do you think he'd be up for... I think there's a few races this year where we haven't got a co-commentator yet. Maybe we get Binotto in. He
could be the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That was a weird scenario. I remember in the last few hours of being in the paddock, I managed to grab a couple of words with him. And I said, are you going to be here? And he's like, I will be here next year. So perhaps there's another announcement coming our way at some point, and he will be in Formula One. But I like Fred Vasseur. He's very cheery. I did some filming with him the other day, and he's always got this sort of little giggle going on. But Jolyon, like you say, don't be fooled by that. And I think when it all starts to turn up a bit in the coming races, it will be interesting to see how his persona develops and changes, because let's not forget, this is a huge role for Fred personally as well, to be representing Scuderia Ferrari. We kind of saw that a bit in the Drive to Survive documentary, which I'm not all the way through, I have to say. But you see what it means to an individual to lead a team like that. And I'm interested to see how Fred deals with that pressure.
And driver-wise at Ferrari, what are we thinking? Because Sainz and Leclerc, I think certainly, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think for myself and Palmer and Benson, we all sort of think Leclerc is, broadly speaking, stronger than Sainz. But Sainz looked fairly comfortable in testing and sort of was getting a bit more, and he had a really troublesome start to last season and was always kind of playing catch-up. Do we think Sainz has got a shot at beating Leclerc this season?
I think because it's an evolution of the car, I think the way that he made steps last year should help him out. There's not a major rule change. The car's not completely different at Ferrari. But also, I just still think Leclerc looked quicker in Bahrain. I think Leclerc's probably naturally the stronger driver there.
I want them both to be challenging. I want everyone involved right at the front. Come on, Formula One, deliver.
20-way fight for the win. That's all I'm asking for.
Please.
Right, so towards the end of last season, it was actually Mercedes who ended up being Red Bull's strongest challengers. And you kind of thought they'd got back onto the straight and narrow. Andrew, are they still a little... directionless isn't quite the word I'm looking for, but a little. There were times last year where it felt like they were just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what stuck, and it doesn't feel like that's necessarily changed a huge amount.
Well, I think they literally were at various points last year as they were trying to establish what was going on with the porpoising, what was the root effect of that, because of course you can't simulate that. It was interesting. In the press release that they put out ahead of the launch, in fact, at the launch, and press releases are not normally things that are very interesting, let's be honest, but Toto Wolff used the word eventually to describe when they would be competing at the front, and everybody immediately jumped on that because, it was like a big red light saying we're not competitive at the start of the season. And they kind of basically admitted that that was going to be the case when they launched the car. And it was very obvious in the test, as obvious as anything can be in testing, that they are, guess what, not competitive at the start of the season. I think from what I understand, their data suggests us anywhere between 0.3 of a second slower than the Red Bull. They've got some developments coming. Obviously, everybody will have developments coming. One of the most interesting things, again, that Toto Wolff has said in the course of the winter, because everybody zeroed in on the side pods of the Mercedes because they're so different still from pretty much everybody else. Nearly every other team's gone down the Red Bull design route. Mercedes have stuck with their old one, although it is the pods, they have changed it slightly. Wolff said that there is a new side pod design coming at some point. He didn't say when. We don't know what that design is, but it does rather suggest that this car that they're starting the season with is some kind of interim step towards somewhere else. And we'll have to make a judgment a bit further down the line as to whether that step is more towards Red Bull or not. We won't know yet. One interesting thing about the winter was Aston Martin, who we're going to come on to in a minute. Dan Fallows, their new technical director, who'd come from Red Bull. I actually asked him at one point, is the Red Bull route the only one that's going to be effective? He didn't actually answer that question directly, but what he did say was when you start going down that Red Bull design route, you can immediately see why it's going to be so effective for you. So it's interesting Mercedes haven't gone that way. One other team principal said that he wondered whether it was engineering pride that had kept them in that direction. But there are still big questions, and they definitely had an up and down test. They were quite positive on day one. They were very negative on day two, a bit better on day three. The car did show some pace, but Hamilton's fastest lap was on the very softest tyre, whereas the Red Bull and the Ferrari and the Aston Martin all used the second softest tyre to set their time. So I think it's going to be some time before Mercedes are going to be winning by the looks of things.
Are you surprised how sort of nonchalantly they're taking the thought of not winning again? Because I look at Mercedes and they don't seem particularly downbeat at the prospect of having another year playing catch up. And maybe they'll have pulled the wool over all of our eyes and they'll be there at the front next week in Bahrain. But it seems to me like they're just almost accepting their position as third, maybe second, but behind Red Bull, rather than sort of having, outwardly anyway, particular stress about it. In particular, they just, that was just how it was.
What would you like to see from them? What would is it like the way they're sort of talking.
I think, well, I just feel like the manner of the team is, just this. Eventually we'll get there, and is even just the word eventually when we get there. There's no level of punch, and this is a Mercedes team that have been the most dominant in Formula One history. Pretty much before this, they have huge resource. They have maybe the best driver lineup on the grid still, and I just feel like another year, considering they made good steps last year, another year of playing catch up for them is really not good for a team of that size, and that strength.
I think there's a couple of things in the mix there, Jolie, and one is that Red Bull were really quite far ahead of them last year, and they, being realistic, they wouldn't have expected to completely close that gap in just one winter. So it's kind of like a work in progress, and they're kind of accepting of that on one level. On another level, I think they're very careful, Mercedes, not to project, or as often as possible, not to project any kind of image of external crisis. If they're going to have a crisis, they want to keep it completely behind closed doors and not sort of show everybody that that's happening. I suspect that if this car does prove to be as difficult or as uncompetitive as last year, and there has been no obvious progress, because they will expect progress, I suspect behind the scenes things are going to start happening, because I can't imagine Toto Wolff accepting another year, as you say, of uncompetitiveness of that degree that we saw last year.
I think the problem is that they were battling porpoising so much last year. They've now got through that. They've now exposed other limitations. It's, I guess, a question of how long it's going to take for them to get on top of those limitations. Are we going to be waiting 3/4 of this season for them to get through those? And maybe they've just thought, actually, this is a much longer process, and we're readying ourselves for, who knows, 2026 or something, and they're just taking it slow and steady. But as you say, Jillian, that's not the championship-winning team that we've come to know of late. So it is strange. But at least he didn't put a number of races on it. At least the word eventually could be, interpreted differently.
It's not podium by Barcelona.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it could be this year, could be next year, could be next decade. Eventually, they'll get back there. But they did a good job at catch up last year. Eventually, by winning in Brazil.
Was that in their press release last year, Andrew? Have you gone back to see what was in the launch press?
Mercedes, just the slogan is just eventually now.
Definitely not. No.
But they won in Brazil on merit. They nearly won. I mean, they pushed Red Bull hard in Mexico. I know those two are as kind of anomalies, but also you look at Zandvoort. The race pace, they had that race to win. Silverstone, they had a great chance there. So, and that was midway through the season. So it's almost, I feel like they've made good progress last year to the point where they are really nip and tuck with Ferrari as Red Bull's closest challengers. And I just feel like they've not carried that momentum through to the start of this year. But we're all hypothesising off the back of pre-season testing. But it's just the feeling from the team is that they've slipped back again, and they're having to now chase once more.
I guess the best thing to always do is under-promise and over-deliver. Maybe that is just the way they want to approach this year, and it's better to be this way round rather than coming in being like, we've made huge strides over the winter, there's no porpoising, we're not bottoming out. Maybe they've chosen to go that way, but I do think the balance of the car is off, and I wasn't in Bahrain, but Jolyon, perhaps you saw that when you were out on track.
It looked like they were fighting it a lot more than the Red Bull and the Ferrari as well, and the Aston Martin, to be honest. But this is also a team that's famous for sandbagging in recent years, so maybe they're back to that now.
Testing bingo, Jolyon Palmer.
The thing you have to avoid from personal experience is under-promising and then under-delivering. That doesn't tend to go well.
Let's not get too personal.
My question... yeah, all right. My question here, Jolyon, is we're talking to... Are Mercedes the third fastest car? Are you pretty confident with that?
Well, I still think logic says they must be. But the threat is Aston Martin, who have had a bit of a revamp over the winter. Dan Fallows, who, as Andrew said already, moved over from Red Bull. This is the first year he's put his own design stamp on the car. And they've signed Fernando Alonso, and I think all of these things. Alonso is an upgrade on Sebastian Vettel, in my opinion. He's so hungry for it. I'm watching him trackside day one, and he's wringing the neck of the car. There's no level of building up to it for him. So I think he's as hungry as ever. I think he sees that Aston Martin are moving in the right direction. And Lance Stroll wasn't at testing because he had a bicycle crash and has hurt his wrist to some degree. So it meant that Fernando had more time in the car, and the car looks really good. So they are the team. I don't think any other midfielder can make a jump, but Aston Martin are the question mark. I'd be surprised if they're actually ahead of Mercedes in qualifying in Bahrain, but some people are very much touting it.
Every other team was impressed by the Aston Martin. The other guy who's worth mentioning, by the way, on their design recruitment program is a guy called Eric Blondin, who went from Mercedes, who's the deputy technical director there. Both he and Dan Fellows are very well regarded throughout Formula One. And I agree with Jolyon. It didn't look quite as quick as the Mercedes to me, but lots of people thought it was. And actually, when you start to think about Aston Martin, you could see how they could make a jump from where they were perceived to be, because actually, through the course of last year, they made quite a lot of progress. And in the races, at least, last year, not so much in qualifying, but towards the end of the season, they were battling with, generally, Alpine and McLaren as sort of one of the teams best of the rest, even though they only finished 7th. So when you add in a driver upgrade, I agree with Jolyon on that one, by the way, and you have a driver downgrade as well at Alpine, because they've lost Alonso, McLaren are in all sorts of trouble. You could see it very easily how they could become 4th quickest team. And if they've made the sort of step it looks like they've made with the car, Mercedes weren't, Mercedes are a long way behind Red Bull, we think. So, you could see logically why they might be able to challenge Mercedes. So that's, and what a story it would be, wouldn't it, if a 41-year-old Fernando Alonso could start mixing it sort of in the top 6 positions. I think we'd all like to see that.
The other thing worth mentioning with Aston Martin is their race pace, because they've gone down this Red Bull philosophy, and what won the title last year was the race pace, really, of the Red Bull, more than the qualifying pace. Leclerc had the most poles, but it was nowhere near in race pace, certainly as the season went on. And the Aston Martin race pace looked pretty decent from the long runs they did as well. So that might be, even if they haven't got quite qualifying pace of the Mercedes, they might get closer to Mercedes, maybe even Ferrari, if Ferrari have major degradation again.
Also going to be interesting this weekend to see if Felipe Drugovich does in fact drive the car. If Lance Stroll isn't back, that'll be an interesting one. His debut in a car that could, as you say, Andrew, be mixing it up right at the front end of the field. Quite a jump for him from F2 to straight into the hot seat.
It would be nice to see, though, wouldn't it? Because I think there's always a frustration when Formula 2 champions don't get their shot in Formula 1, and even if it was just a race, it would be nice to see Drugovich in there for sure. He's the guy that sort of Aston Martin have got in mind if Lance Stroll doesn't take the start.
Just on this, why Aston Martin had to announce that if Stroll was unavailable, Drugovich would drive the car? They had to announce that. I'm like, no, he's the reserve driver. It should be enforceable.
The PR has been really odd. I don't know what's been going on behind the scenes, but on Saturday night, Mike Crack, the team principal, did a sort of little scrum with the media, and he was asked several times about Sebastian Vettel potentially coming back, and he just wouldn't deny it. And so, it's like, why not just, if there was nothing going on, why not just say, no, Sebastian's retired, and we've got reserve drivers, and he'll be one of them, say something like that. Don't be all, enigmatic about Sebastian Vettel potentially making a comeback. And then,
was there something going on?
Well, I don't know,
Vettel?
because there must have been. Because he admitted he talked to him, and he wouldn't deny it. But then 12 hours later, they put out a statement saying it was going to be Drugovich if Stroll wasn't fit. It's like, not exactly. Maybe they wanted the exposure. I don't know. But
here we are giving it to them.
You have to assume something was going on, and then it went away again, and they went back to what you would imagine was going to be plan A in the first place anyway. So they're being very coy about Stroll's injury, by the way. They described it as a minor bicycling accident, but it was minor enough to keep him out of the car for 3 full days of testing.
Has this got Montoya Montoya tripping over a tennis ball written all over it.
I don't know. I can only assume he did have a bicycling accident, but anyone who rides a bike, and these Formula 1 drivers tend to go quite fast on them, if you have an accident, it might well not be minor, you know. So I think it's probably more serious than they're letting on at the moment. So we'll have to see what happens. They say they're going to do their best to get Stroll in the car, but it's got to be at least evens that Drugovich is going to be driving, you would have thought.
You had a shunt, didn't you, Palmer, in Richmond Park?
I actually also had a bike shunt the same day as Lance Stroll was announced to have had a bike shunt.
Really?
And look at me now. I've made it to pre-season
You're
testing.
okay.
I'll tell you what, Andrew.
It's the coconut
I'm okay
water.
in spirit, but I am hobbling a little bit. I'm hobbling.
Are
I had
you?
a very sore hip.
Yeah.
Came down on my right-hand side. Nasty. But it seems like Lance is... I assume he's had a worse run than me, or he's just not as tough.
Sussex grit.
Sussex grit's back again. But it seems like it's possibly the strong rumour is it's a broken wrist that he's sustained in this fall.
Yeah.
And he's been to see some MotoGP doctors about it, and they can manage to bandage drivers' own riders up very well, and somehow they're riding with all sorts of broken limbs. So you never know, but I would have thought that would mean that you can't race the week after you can't test, personally. But
I can't see how you could drive a Formula 1 car with a broken wrist.
I seem to remember watching Cal Crutchlow at Silverstone. I think he broke his wrist and was like just bandaged up with. I'm sure they just sort of put them in position on the bikes, but it's a bit different in the cars.
yeah, and also as Sussex grit as I am, the motorbike riders are another level. So even if I'm tough,
Level 10.
they can do it.
Do we need to announce that you're not filling in for Stroll? Is that what we're saying? You're not ready.
Well,
after your shunt?
the rumours never really started, so I was a bit put out when they did say Drugovich is definitely in, without even a cursory phone call would have been nice.
And Palmer's before Vettel in the alphabet.
Hey, it's not me. I think it will be Drugovich driving next week. That's unless there's some real medical magic going on. I think he'll be in the car. And it'll be a good shot to see what an F2 champ can do.
Well, my last bike shunt was when I couldn't get my foot out of the clip on the pedal quickly enough. I would pay
Good money to have been in that car watching you just unclip and go. The comedy shunt.
That's fantastic. Right, we are now into the midfield, and
Or
Aston
are
Martin
we?
seemingly at the front of it. Well, yeah, exactly. Or are we? But I think for me the biggest, everyone else in the midfield. Okay, Alpine a little bit further back, maybe than you would expect. AlphaTauri, who knows, whatever. But Williams getting a bit further forward. We'll kind of cover all that off briefly. But to me, the biggest thing seems like McLaren, to be honest, because they seem in a world of pain, Andrew.
Yeah, well, they were another one who at the launch sort of set their stall out immediately. They basically admitted straight up that they'd missed their development targets and that there was some stuff that they only saw too late and it wasn't on the car, and they were going to have an upgrade in 4 or 5 races' time. It sounds like around about Baku time when that'll come. But and it really looked like it in testing, Jolien, didn't it? The car didn't look that great out on track, and it looked pretty slow. And I think some people were even telling me it might even be at the back of the grid, which would be a hell of a fall for McLaren if that's true. Somebody said that. I don't know whether that's true, but they look like they're struggling to get out of Q1 was the way it looked in testing. But again, you've got to be careful with these because it's only testing. But everyone said the midfield closed up. So if Williams have moved up and McLaren have not hit their development targets, who knows? Maybe they are going to be struggling right at the back somewhere.
Also, is what they saw just before they launch something that's wrong and needs fixing, or something good that they can bring to the car? I think that's a bit of a question as well.
Well, I think that there's both in a way. I think they've not made anywhere near enough progress with the car as it is at the moment. And this new thing is like, oh, darn it, we should have gone and done that. And obviously that's going to eventually, you would think, move them forward to whatever point they're going to get to. But
yeah, I remember last year McLaren were terrible in Bahrain, weren't they? In testing, they could barely run with a fundamental design flaw with the brakes. This year they've had another fundamental design flaw that didn't hold them back quite as much, but part of the wheel brows over the bit that covers the wheel on the top was breaking, so they had to keep coming back into the garage. And last year they started and they were awful, fighting with right at the back with Williams and Aston Martin in Bahrain, and then they moved forward and were okay. So I think what's held McLaren back is they found late in the design process they decided to go in a different direction, and that's basically meant they're really undercooked in this direction, and they're now frantically trying to get an upgrade package that will be what they kind of wanted to launch in a way, but they've had to just go with this car in the first place. And then they're talking about Baku, which I think is race 4 after there's a bit of a break in April, and then Baku right at the end of April might be when they can make some proper progress, because they look like, of all the teams, they are very open about being back from where they wanted to be.
Rosanna, McLaren are like a bit of a roller coaster at the moment, right? Because they obviously had the terrible Honda years, and then they were really on the up again with, you know, Norris often fighting at the front, nearly winning in Sochi, and then the momentum seems to have kind of stalled almost.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right that we're talking about McLaren, who are obviously celebrating their 60th year. It should be a great year, an anniversary year, and instead we're wondering whether they're going to be languishing on the back row of the grid. I imagine Daniel Ricciardo's breathing a sigh of relief that he's not having to deal with all this again. But of course, they've got a rookie in Oscar Piastri, who's got quite a lot of pressure on his young shoulders to deliver. And if the car isn't there for him to deliver in, that's going to be tricky for him to prove his point and why he jumped ship from the Alpine camp and went with McLaren. And Lando Norris is going to start to get a bit tired, I would say, and a bit frustrated that his F1 career hasn't really lived up to everyone's expectation. Yes, there were those moments where he was troubling the podium spots and you know, maybe even getting that race win in Russia if the heavens hadn't opened. But yeah, surely he's going to start asking some severe questions of Zak Brown, and obviously now new team boss Andrea Stella. But it was interesting, that word honest coming out again, Zak saying they wanted to be honest from the start. But honesty is great, it's a good policy, but it doesn't win you any races.
I think Lando's got to ask questions of his own management. That's the big thing for Lando Norris, because he's locked into McLaren for such a long time. And did he really think they were going to be fighting for a championship? They were making progress, as you said, Jack, but did he really think that they were going to be winning this? Because he's there for another 3 years, and I think he's one of the most talented drivers on the grid. He's right up there with all the best of the Leclercs, maybe the Verstappen even, and Russell, but he's just hobbled in what it looks at best is going to be a midfield car again this season.
So the logic of Norris was as follows. McLaren have some big infrastructure projects coming on stream. There's going to be a new wind tunnel, which is due to start sort of spring, summer this year, and new simulator, and some things to do with the car manufacturer within the factory. And he thought that if you look at the progress that McLaren had made up to the point where he signed that contract, without those projects, then you bring those projects in. He thought that they would be competitive by 2025, which is the final year of his contract. Maybe they will make that big step, but the problem, of course, is that you get a new wind tunnel in the middle of 2023. Your first car that you're really going to properly design in it is the 2025 car. Are you going to jump from fourth, if they are fourth in 24, to the front in 25? Probably not. Already, I'm hearing rumours about Audi being interested in Norris potentially. If you look at who's gone there as their new CEO, Andreas Seidel, the former McLaren team principal. Lots of people are wondering whether he might go in for Norris and get him as one of the their header signature signing for 2026. We'll have to see. But if McLaren can't improve, certainly you would think Norris would be open to any overtures that came from that direction.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Who else is standing out in the midfield? We've got Hülkenberg back in at Haas, Gasly in at Alpine, De Vries in at AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo sort of rocking along. Are there any other sort of big stories in that midfield, Andrew?
Well, Alpine, they're interesting because they didn't look great at all in testing, but they're pretty confident that they're where they expected to be, and their targets this year are to close on the top 3 and finish 4th. I think I can only assume that they were running heavy in testing to give themselves that confidence. The car looked very, very stiff was like a skateboard. But either they're fibbing or they were running heavy. So we'll have to see on that front. Other than that, I think it's kind of what you'd expect. But, those are the teams that the big question marks are around at the moment. McLaren, Alpine, and Aston Martin, where are they all going to shake out? It looks like there's been some big movement in that area.
I feel like Alfa Romeo might be ones to watch.
Alfa Romeo look all right, but no one else stands out, I think, is the blunt answer to the question. It's all very much as we left it last year, really. I think maybe the field's tightened up. And in that window, a couple of tenths of Alfa Romeo found it, might put them to the front of the midfield, and then they'll be back where they started last year again. I thought they looked quite decent. Haas have Hulkenberg back, which I think will be good for them. But I was speaking to someone from Alpine yesterday, and they weren't quite as upbeat as the media is reporting everyone else to be, the management and the drivers. So sort of in the garage, it's maybe not quite as cheerful spirits as everyone else seemed, because the car doesn't look very good, but it is this really weird situation where everyone seems to be saying it's amazing.
They're bringing an upgrade, aren't they, this weekend? They're bringing an upgrade already. I mean, whether...
Yeah, so maybe they know that there's going to be reformed for this weekend, and that's why there's residual contentment.
I'm interested to see how those two drivers get on eventually, because the Gasly-Ocon relationship has always been one that people have worried about, and I will watch on with interest on how they get on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, they don't get on, but they keep saying, yeah, we do.
Yeah.
And then everyone says, no, you don't. And they're like, no, we do.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story about that, right? They had this launch last week before testing, and they held it in London on a Thursday night, and it was quite late. It started at like 8 p.m. And as these things do, it dragged on, and they were very, very pleased with themselves that they got Zinedine Zidane as a team ambassador. And so the press conferences ran over, basically. They started way too late. It was heading towards 10 o'clock, and everyone was thinking, we've got to get home, we've got to get our trains. And I grabbed the bull by the horns, because I wanted to find out. I wanted to find out about this relationship thing, because I'd heard over the winter that there'd been some PR event where they were supposed to be in a car together for 3 hours to go somewhere, and one of them had said, no way am I doing that. I'm not sitting in the car with him for 3 hours. You must be joking. So I waded straight in with the first question to both of them. You've had an up and down relationship, and how are you going to get on this year? And they were both like, are you kidding me? This is the first question of the winter, after the winter, come on. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I've got a train to catch, but and you're late, basically, and that's not my fault. But anyway, Ocon was like, yeah, straight up, we're not going to be best friends ever, but we don't have to be, we just have to work together. So of course everybody's thinking, well, let's see how that goes. Of course, Formula One drivers in teams together famously don't have to be best mates, very rarely are. But they don't often start already not best mates, so that's why everybody's focusing on that. And there's a lot of, French drivers, pressure to go forward. You can see how it could become combustible.
Outwardly, they look very different characters as well, don't they? And I think they are quite different characters. And you can see why with they've obviously come up through the ranks together. They have been very close in the past. You can see how that's just drifted away, and I do think that there's going to be so much tension there, and you've got to play it down. You have to be like, no, we're all right. You can't be like, I do actually, I know we've signed a deal now, but I really hate this guy. You got to play it down. Otherwise, what do? You're just fanning the flames, aren't you, at that point? And it's definitely going to blow up. So you play it down, and we'll get to qualifying session next week. One of them will be ahead, and the tension will already be there. That's my feeling on it.
Okay, looking forward to it. It's going to be great. Right, I think we'll sort of, like I say, the rest of the midfield, it's all a little bit wait and see, TBD, how it all ends up. The original plan was to maybe do some predictions of who would win the championships, but is there any point doing predictions, Andrew?
Well, I know what I'm going to predict, Jack, so you can ask me if you want.
Rosanna, would you say anything different?
Oh, it's a bit depressing, isn't it? I mean,
okay, fine. That's why I don't want to do them. Right, okay, we're not going to do them. We're not going to do predictions. Who knows what will happen this season? You'll have to.
So much to look forward to.
Right? No, it is. It is obviously going to be a great year. Plenty of races. You can also still listen to the series that stars Andrew Benson, Sports Strangest Crimes, Spygate.
So good.
Two bonus episodes have been releases, and Andrew's on both of them. So there's a listener questions one and a F1 technological innovations one. So head to BBC Sounds and get stuck into Spygate in Sports Strangest Crimes.
Yeah, and don't worry, it's not just me. There are other people
No,
as well.
Andrew, you are Sports Strangest Crime. So I think that's, to be honest, I think that's all from us. We will be
No. Let me just end it on a more positive note, because I feel like we've ended with the doom and gloom of a Red Bull walkover. So I'm going to give you just a stat. 2016 was the last time the victor of round one won the championship. How's that for a little nugget?
Great.
That's a good
So
stat,
stash that away.
If Verstappen comes out and wins this weekend in Bahrain,
he'll be the first person since 2016 to win the championship.
And the other thing, which is a better known stat, is there's 23 races this year. It's the longest season in Formula One history. So even if Red Bull are on top right now, or McLaren are at the back right now, or whatever, everything that we've just spoken about, it can change so much with development. It's a long season. There's so many different tracks that we go to and the rest of it. So it doesn't all mean that 3 days in Bahrain doesn't set the tone for the entire season.
Also, it's really important to remember something we have forgotten, which is the Red Bull aerodynamic restrictions. They've got two levels of aerodynamic restrictions. One which was automatic, because there's now a sliding scale where the champion gets the least amount of aerodynamic research allowance and the 10th team gets the most amount. On top of that, Red Bull have a further 10% reduction for breaking the budget cap in 2021, which they got the penalty for in October last year. And that 10% restriction started from the moment they got that penalty. So basically, the way Formula One car design works, the current Red Bull was pretty much a spec that would be locked in not long after that restriction started. So as the teams develop their cars through the year, Red Bull have less facility to develop their car because of those restrictions. And the other teams are hoping that that's going to have an effect as the season wears on. Whether it will come in soon enough, if there is even an effect, because Red Bull are extremely good at developing, obviously, we'll have to wait and see. But that's another reason to believe that as the season goes on, Red Bull should get pulled back by the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes.
Oh, we've turned it around in the 11th hour. I'm feeling pumped
Superb
and ready.
work, guys. Yeah. Well, then make sure you come back on Thursday evening, everyone, because we'll be in Bahrain and we'll be looking ahead to the season, and we're hearing from some of the drivers and building up to the season opener, and that will be on 5 Live, or you can download it as ever here on the Checkered Flag podcast. The race gets underway at 3 o'clock on Sunday on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra. We've got live commentary of every practice session as ever on the BBC Sport website and across 5 Live and stuff. And looking forward to the season getting underway. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. We will see you ahead of the first race of the season on Thursday.